Welcome, everyone. We'll give people about a minute more to get connected and get in the waiting room, and then we will begin shortly. But thank you, everyone, for joining us. Perfect. I'm seeing a few more people join, so we'll get started in about 30 seconds. Amazing. So let's go ahead and get started. Um, Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kaylin Pete, and I am the program specialist here at the Family Online Safety Institute. And we're so happy to have you guys here today to join us for our webinar, Connected Worlds: How Youth Navigate Technology at Home and in the Classroom. So as many of you know, today is Safer Internet Day, and it's kind of an international moment to pause and reflect on how technology is really shaping young people's lives. And just as importantly, kind of how adults can show up in ways that are supportive, as well as informed and responsive. So this year, we really wanted to focus on something that we've been hearing again and again from young people, and it's that they really don't experience technology in silos. So their digital lives move with them, whether it's from home, school, and kind of everywhere in between. So today's conversation is really centered on that reality. So we'll be exploring how young people actually experience tech across these connected spaces, and what it looks like when adults respond with curiosity and trust rather than negative feelings like fear or assumptions. And we're really excited today to be joined by two incredible organizations, NoFiltr as well as Discovery Education. And we're really glad to have both teams here, kind of bringing their expertise and commitment to supporting young people. You'll also be hearing directly from members of the NoFiltr Youth Innovation Council, who are going to be featured today in some video segments. So before we dive in and go any further, I wanted to quickly kind of walk through how today's session is going to work. It's going to be a little bit different from your traditional webinar, because you're going to be hearing directly from young people through a few short video reflections on three topics. And so after each video reflection, you'll hear kind of from our experts to respond to what they've just heard, as well as unpack what it really means for families, educators, and really anyone supporting young people. And we'll also close with a short audience Q&A. So I invite you to drop any questions that you might have throughout the webinar in the chat, and we will make sure that we get to those at the end. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to our panelists so they can introduce themselves and share a bit about their work. And so Adele, I would love for you to start.
Thanks so much, Kaylin. I appreciate it. And I'm excited to be here. I was telling Kaylin, I apologize. I am a little bit down with a cold. So if I sound nasally, I'm so sorry about that. My East Coast people, I think there's a little sympathy because the weather has been just horrible for us. Nonetheless, like I said, I'm super excited. This is our second time back with FOSI for Safer Internet Day. My name is Adele Taylor. I'm the CEO of NoFiltr. NoFiltr is a youth-driven brand that connects young people, tech companies, and civil society together to co-create a safer digital world. And one of the ways we do that, as Kaylin mentioned, is through our NoFiltr Youth Innovation Council, who you'll be hearing from today. They were sad that they couldn't be here actually in person online. As you probably know, it's school time, but nonetheless, they're excited to share their experiences online and how new and emerging technology has affected both their home and their school life. So thank you so much, Fosi, for having me.
Great. We're so happy to have you, Adele, as well as hear from the Youth Council. And Christine, I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. I'm Christine Seibert, also a fellow East Coaster here. So I feel your pain with the weather and the illness, Adele. But I'm the Senior Impact Partnerships lead at Discovery Education. And what that really means is we just work with mission aligned organizations to bring high quality educational materials into the classroom in a very digital way. And so, we were founded with the mission to inspire curiosity, build confidence, and accelerate learning. And in the last 20 years or so, we've really worked on connecting industry to classroom, helping students build real world solutions and engaging students and educators through standards aligned content. And, from that sort of branching out of connecting industry and classroom, one of the areas I'm most passionate about is digital citizenship and the initiative that we stood up in partnership with FOSI. So super excited to be part of this conversation as our work really empowers students to sort of navigate the ever-evolving digital world. What does it mean to think critically? What does AI safety look like? What does responsibility look like? So, personally, as a mother of two littles, I'm really thrilled to be part of today's conversation and how we can better align home, community, and school efforts overall. So thank you so much for having me.
Great. We're so excited to have you, Christine, and really lean into that classroom perspective. So with that, thank you both so much for sharing a bit about your work. And to kick things off, we're going to start by hearing directly from young people. So in this first video, you'll hear youth reflect on how technology actually shows up in their lives, both at home and in the classroom, and where their experiences don't always line up with adult assumptions. So with that, we'll play the first video.
I think at home, it's mostly with like me using it for school, like sometimes like asking it for help with certain like homework problems, or just consuming like TikTok and Instagram where I see videos of like AI generated content like on TikTok. And I think at school, it's more so like sometimes it's integrated into like our school platform. Like we do have like an AI like chat bot for school where you can ask it questions. However, at school, it is mostly banned, so I wouldn't say I see it at school as much, but I do see it a lot, like at home and like in a home setting.
In school, I see it like teachers creating worksheets using AI. Sometimes it's bad, but students use it to cheat on assignments, but also I see it being used like for good things at school too, like just like using it to better explain concepts, like etc. And using it like to check answers if we don't have an answer key. So honestly, like sometimes I feel like I see it being used to enhance learning, but it's definitely used for cheating as well. And then at home, I feel like it's used for so many different things, like whether it's just like easily planning out like activities or finding the fastest route to a place. AI can be like so helpful in just like little things like that at home, I feel like.
So my parents actually, they really like AI. They use it for their work all the time. My dad keeps coming home and telling us how he uses AI to automate Excel sheets or something like that. My mom, she's taking a college class and is using AI to like help her with the tests and stuff like that. So sometimes my parents might know even more about AI. I think they use it more than me.
I do talk to a lot of parents that are like, up to date with the technology, and they just think like, oh, my child's probably just cheating using like AI to like do schoolwork. But I think that's like one of like the least scary things that children are using AI for. Like, I think the scary part is that children are now using AI as like their primary hub, like logic and reasoning. Like they'll think of like random questions and they'll just ask them like, should I break up with my boyfriend? And they're just asking AI these things. And I'm like, I don't think that AI should be the source of like where you make your decisions. I think there's nothing wrong with like mental health chatbots, but like asking an AI bot for therapy and listening to it diagnose you is like not entirely like ethical in my opinion. And so I think that's what's the scarier aspect, and that's what adults don't really know about. They just assume we're using it to cheat.
Like you're using it as like a replacement for a friend, and you're like becoming so addicted that it's like replacing real relationships, which I will admit, like I know that's true for some people in some cases, but like there are so many other uses for it. And I know I've seen in some of my classes, like we've used this like AI tutor thing in one of my classes, like as an assignment, where it basically like grows with you and like helps explain the concepts you don't really understand. So in a situation like that, I feel like it honestly enhances learning, but there are definitely cases like what adults would like usually jump to the conclusion of is that it's some that's like automatically bad.
I mean, like my parents, they know I'm a good kid, so they don't really question me too much if I'm like using AI irresponsibly. They encourage me to like my mom especially is like just use AI for everything. She doesn't really care. I definitely share with my parents what projects I use it for. I shared with my parents like how I use it for speech and debate and how I use it to help my write my cases. And then, as I said, my parents are also sharing how they're using it for their work and automating certain tasks.
Great. Well, at first, I just want to take a moment to thank our youth for those really thoughtful responses. And Adele, I wanted to start with you, kind of diving right into our reflections. In your work with leading youth digital programs, you spend a lot of time listening, directly to young people. And based off of what you've heard from this video, what stood out to you, or maybe surprised you about how they describe their day-to-day use of tech?
Yes. I think the biggest thing that stood out to me was the juxtaposition between how adults think young people are using AI and how young people themselves are actually utilizing AI and what they're utilizing it for. There is, I think, a clear kind of mismatch about or between how adults frame risk and more importantly, how youth experience it as a usefulness and a necessity. Haley, one of the youth council members you just saw talking, spoke about how youth are using it for logic and reasoning, which is very alarming, not just as a tool to cheat potentially on classroom subjects or test. And I think that adults tend to utilize that framework and go right there instead of thinking about all the other, maybe potentially harmful ways youth can be using and experiencing AI. I'm also always amazed by how much young people are just context aware and how much they pay attention, right? Michael, another one of the youth council members, just spoke about how his mom is an avid AI user, so much so that she often encourages him to utilize AI on almost everything. And so while I do love the opportunity that creates to start having conversations, and I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later between adults, caregivers, and young people, it also, I think, opens the conversation of a gap of where there could be a lot more education and a lot more conversation that can lead to education for young people as they're navigating this new and emerging technology.
I think that's great. And I really want to kind of building off of that gap that you noted. Christine, I'd love to kind of hear from you with this next question from your perspective in working at Discovery Education. Um, where do you see, I guess, the biggest gaps, right, that Adele was talking about between, where adults assume that young people use technology and what they're doing online, and what that reality actually looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to pull a little bit on the thread of Adele was leading with there, what's also most interesting is in the three sort of testimonies we just saw, it's kind of like mirroring what we see in the classroom. The knowledge, the usage, and the comfortability with the tools vary based on household, based on person, based on so many different things, right? So when we're sort of thinking about how we're approaching this conversation with youth, we have to really keep that in mind, that everyone has a different sort of foundation or ground level in which they're operating off of. I think a common thing that adults sort of think through or assume are really around like, oh, well, they're young, they're tech savvy, they know what they're doing, they actually maybe know more than me. And sometimes that's just not the case based on students' exposure to the tools. Everyone has a different foundational level of critical thinking as well. So when we think about anthropomorphizing the AI, like personifying it, parents, I don't think are really understanding that kids are thinking that these are people, asking questions like, should I break up with my, significant other? I think that's a question typically you would ask of a friend or another human. So again, I think parents are just really making the assumption, oh, they got it, they know it, they're young, they're savvy, they're in this, they're in that. But there's really an opportunity for parents to lean in and maybe model some lifelong learning behaviors, whether it's around AI or tech uses in general. I think there's just like a very quick foot off the pedal. Like, again, they're young, they know how to use it. I don't need to lean in here. But it is pretty critical that they lean in. So that's the biggest gap that we're seeing for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that's really important, Christine, when you talk to kind of the gap that also exists sometimes within households from, from the
Yeah.
classroom to the home or with even from home to home. And so I think that's really something that needs to be brought to people's attention. And Adele, I would love to turn to you for this next question and kind of drawing on your experience with youth again. How can adults shift away from this kind of reacting to specific tools to more understanding the context in which teens use them, kind of like they spoke to in the video, in terms of the how, the why, and the when?
Yeah. I think, and just double clicking on a lot of the things and points that Christine brought up, young people are very highly aware of adult perceptions. And I think oftentimes will self-center themselves about how they share, because they expect judgment or maybe shame or blame in return of the conversation. And I think there's maybe a couple of steps that adults can take to shift that perception and to shift away from reacting instead of really trying to understand. And one is starting with a purpose, not the platform. At No Filter, we really try to make sure adults know that they should separate curiosity from consequence and really lean into having more conversations with their young people, asking them, oh, what does this tool do? Or why are you using this tool over another one? I think curiosity for young people can go a long way in starting that conversation and helping adults to understand how their young people are utilizing maybe a new AI platform as an example. I also think that recognizing that use at schools is often shaped by performance and pressure. One of our youth council members did talk about that earlier on in this video about how they're utilizing it maybe as a component to cheating. And that's very different of how they would use an emerging tech or platform at home. So I guess recognizing why they're utilizing it and what, education needs to be happening with that. And then acknowledging that using tech isn't just one behavior. I think, for adults too, sometimes we come at it from the perception of, oh, they're using it just for this one purpose, or all technology is good, or all technology is bad. And just like we have different platforms, we have different social media apps, really leaning in and making sure adults understand that context as well, that young people are going to be experiencing an emerging technology in different ways. And I think at No Filter, we see trust grow fastest when adults are asking before something goes wrong, not after.
I think that's great. And Adele, I loved the point about not generalizing how, youth are using tech because youth are so different, right, from one another. And so, ensuring that as we're having these conversations with children, that they are kind of context specific and they see how each child is using that individual piece. And Christine, I wanted to, before we get to our next section, I wanted to turn to you just to ask, what are some proactive questions that adults can ask to kind of invite this honesty and this open communication rather than, defensiveness when these conversations come up?
Think if we all could have a magic book with all the magic questions that are going to hit as parents, we would all love that. So instead of, maybe listing out questions, I would just encourage parents to lead with curiosity, right? You demonstrate your knowledge when you're able to teach. Put your child in the driver's seat. Let them teach you how they're leveraging the tool. Have them talk you through it. What do they love about it? What don't they like about it? And then in that process, you're framing your questions to not only sort of get them to critically think, but then also like, how are you developing boundaries for yourself? Like, oh, I see you're really into this. And we've been at it for an hour, maybe. There's different ways to ask questions, lead with curiosity. That often just brings the guard down a little bit, and they feel like they're in a space that they're actually sharing something with you. So that would just be the encouragement that we would give to parents in that space when trying to have what could be a delicate conversation with a young one.
I think that's great. And I think it really enforces kind of the how we ask matters just as much as the what we ask, and making young people feel safe and creating those open and honest spaces. So with that in mind, we're going to shift back to hearing youth. And in this next video, they're going to talk about what it feels like when expectations around tech don't line up at home and at school, and how this mismatch can really affect their trust and their communication. So let's hear what they have to say.
It's like almost like switching between languages. Like you have to like decide like, okay, so I'm at school, so can I use AI? Probably not. And then once you get home, it's like a free for all. Like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna go plan my car ride tomorrow. Let's go get on AI, and then let me go shop for some Christmas presents. Like, I don't know. It's just, it gets confusing because you have to decide like what you're going to do in what situation.
So I think that teachers have like a more negative perspective about it. And I think that actually causes students to like, like want to like not talk to them or like not ask them questions and just use AI instead, because like they're kind of more hostile and not as accepting about it. But either way, students are going to use it. Like being accepting is a lot more important than like being hostile towards AI, because there are proper ways to use AI. And I think that's an important like idea to kind of like let out, because like AI isn't entirely evil and we shouldn't just like, like be scared of it and never accept it. But we also shouldn't be like misusing it. So I think that's something that teachers do have a role, and they should let people know that's not entirely bad. But they don't do that. They're just like, it's evil. Don't touch it. If you touch it, like you're automatic zero. Like I think that's just like taunting students that AI should be completely avoided, but it's not entirely bad.
It's not blocked or anything on our school computers. We have access to all the AIs. With speech and debate, actually, it's really interesting because apparently they've partnered with some AI companies. So they're actually encouraging AI use within speech and debate. And there's some events where you have a limited amount of prep time to research a completely new topic and present speeches or debates on it. And they're encouraging you to use AI to build those cases.
So I have this computer science teacher, and like I respect her a lot for like her demeanor as a teacher, and then obviously her intelligence and just like her knowledge on the topic. She also like looks at it from a practical perspective, and she like recognizes like how common and like honestly valuable AI tools can be. Our class, it deals a lot with like online risks and online safety and stuff. So it's like she'll educate us on the risks, but she also like look at it from a real life perspective, and not try to like look at it through a lens of like, yeah, you guys are all perfect, like don't use AI, just don't do this. Like it's a lot easier to relate to, because she acknowledges like what's really going on, but then also helps us like understand what like could go wrong. So yeah, I think the way that she approaches it by asking for our experiences and then also sharing her own, I just find a lot of value in that, because it's like, instead of just like learning the concepts and like learning what could happen, it's like really like bringing it down to earth and like, yeah, this is what's happening, and here's like an example of real life.
I think like with a lot of school systems, it's always like extreme or it's just nothing at all. It's always extreme or nothing. There's no like in between of like, maybe what could we do to like bend it a little bit to make it less like daunting. No, it's extreme or nothing. And so it feels like there's never an in between when it comes to like school policy sometimes.
Well, I'm guessing that when they first use different online apps like Clever or Canvas and all those online assignments and grading options, then they probably had some sort of meeting about it paid for by the district so they can learn how to use all those tools. So AI should definitely be included in that, so teachers know how to use it and they don't flat out ban it.
Great. I think what we really heard kind of highlights how young people have completely different rules. One of the youth council members said languages and realities, depending on where they are at home or in the classroom, and kind of how deeply that impacts them. So Christine, for this first question, I would love to start with you. We often talk about how home and school are almost two separate entities, but young people experience them so connected. So I would love to hear, how do these misaligned approaches unintentionally affect the trust and communication with youth?
Yeah, I mean, Sanibel actually mentioned it a little bit in her video, how she respected her educator, that she could relate to her educator. When you have misalignment in that way, it causes like a good cop, almost bad cop dynamic. And quite frankly, leads to mistrust, right? So as a result, and Azelle, you mentioned this earlier, young people are very perceptive. They understand what's going on with adults. When there's a misalignment there, you inadvertently get things like hidden use. Well, I'm going to get in trouble anyway. If I use it at school, I'm going to get in trouble, or maybe if I use it at home, I'm getting in trouble. So now they're hiding something that maybe doesn't need to be hidden, because they just don't know what to expect, right? In terms of their usage, whichever space they're in, or it causes that switching, which I believe Haley mentioned in her conversations as well. And then there's just like an overall like misinterpretation of the use of the tool. Is it cheating, or is it helping? Is it a distraction, or is it an aid, right? So all of these things, I mean, young people are already carrying so much. So when the community and the schools are not aligned, it just is an added layer of distrust and a dynamic that, quite frankly, hurts acceleration of learning.
I think that's a really good point. I love the point that it's an added layer of this mistrust. And I would love to kind of lean into this a little bit more with you, Adele. And so now that we've established that there is that misalignment, what does alignment realistically look like when families and schools are operating under such different, pressures and responsibilities? How do we come to this alignment?
Yes. I think often we're trying to have a shared set of rules and perspectives when it comes to technology. And oftentimes that's going to conflict, right? Because as a parent, I may not have the same thought process or the same mindset about new and emerging technology and how my child is using it that the school that my child attends does. And I think for us, we need to remind ourselves that alignment doesn't necessarily mean identical rules. What I think it does mean is that we should have shared values and clear communication with our young people about how they're going to utilize the emerging technology. Youth, and Christine just talked about this, really benefit the most when they understand why boundaries exist and what that looks like. I believe Haley also talked about this earlier, that understanding a little bit more of the why behind it can negate the mistrust that might come, or as Christine just mentioned, the sneaking around of young people, because there is a shared understanding and clear communication from both their school environment and then also their home environment. I think schools can definitely be transparent about expectations, limitations, because a young person is experiencing technology very differently sometimes than they are at home. While they can both be on the same platform, the reason why they would utilize maybe ChatGPT at school versus why they would use it at home might look different. And Sanibel also spoke about this, about how it's going to be different. You go to school and you can't use AI, and then you come home and it's a complete free for all. So I think consistency and tone, also makes it important when we're having these conversations around alignment and making sure that there's that shared trust between home environment and school environment.
I think that's great. And I really love the point about creating the shared values and the shared why, because realistically, because these two spheres are so different, even if the exact rules can't be the same, the why can be similar, right? And so kind of building off of that, Christine, I would love to hear from your perspective at Discovery Education. What's kind of a singular concrete step for schools, or even families that they can take to better signal this consistency for young people that they're kind of looking for right now?
Yeah, philosophically, in any of the work that we do at Discovery Education, we know that we can't go at it alone, right? We always approach any of our work thoughtfully, and we approach it in a way where there's almost like an ecosystem working in lockstep to aid our educators and our youth. So topics can be really complex, right? And so what does it look like for schools and families to establish a really strong line and clear line of communication, Adele, to your point, and be honest about the complexity of it all. So I know you asked for one step, but what does it look like parents' nights just on the topic, right? Like bring in an expert. It doesn't just have to be the parents and the school community. Like bring in an expert to help bridge that gap, and have those conversations. Monthly updates, like what are you seeing at home? What are you seeing at school? Quick coffee chats. little just touch points that you can have with your school community to really just drive home like we're in this together. Let's stay on the same page.
I love the idea of touch points because I think so often when we're having these conversations, they seem almost daunting. So it's kind of, but where do I start? Because everything seems so overwhelming. So I loved those kind of quick, like, let's just have a conversation, right, as a starting point. And Adele, I would love to hear from you from this question as well, just kind of any concrete steps, from your perspective and working with youth, for families that they can take.
Yeah, I think the first step is just having conversations and leading with curiosity. And you've heard this already from a lot of young people where they say the reason why they might feel more comfortable going to their parents is because they have had these little micro moments of conversation that aren't reactive when something unfortunately something bad has happened to them online, but it's a proactive conversation where they're leading with curiosity, where they're, genuinely curious about what they're doing, how they're exploring. I believe it was Michael who also, with his mom, I think taking it a step further, it would have been nice to maybe hear how they have conversations at the dinner table or after school about how his mom uses AI and how Michael uses AI. I think anything that can have those micro moments where it's curiosity, where it's building trust, where there's open communication, that is an easy first step. And I think that'll help solve a lot of problems down the road for young people and their families.
I completely agree, Adele. And I think that it's just those small signals of consistency. They make a really big difference just in how young people, on an emotional level, feel supported and understood. So I think that's great. I think so far, we've talked about how emerging tech shows up in young people's lives and kind of what happens, right, when those expectations don't align. And as we get towards our third section and our third kind of youth reflection, I want to shift our attention toward kind of what support actually looks like from their perspective. Especially in moments where there's uncertainty or there may be a mistake or an opportunity for learning. So let's go ahead and hear directly from them again.
Yes, you can tell your kids, don't do this, don't do that, don't touch this, don't touch that. But until they see it, until they actually see what are the consequences that come with it, and what are the good things that can come with it if you do it the right way, it's never going to be like something that is embedded in their brain if they don't have that experience they can look back on when they're going to thinking of making a bad decision, because they have no experience to look back on. So they're like, well, I don't know what's going to happen. Let's just try it.
Like, I feel like a lot of the time adults will just almost assume like whatever they say will go for the kids, and it's just not how it's going to work. There needs to be like that like connection, like that like the relatable aspect, so like people will actually buy into it.
Learning about these tools, I guess if the parents are willing to, then the kids can show them what you can do with AI, that it's not all bad, and just shift it to the perspective that it's here to stay, just like computers are here to stay, just like smartphones and the internet is here to stay. Then AI is here to stay, and just introduce them to it and keep an open mind. You could try it out, and who knows, maybe the parents, like my parents, will end up loving it.
Experimenting with it, seeing what it's like, and once they understand, what it's kind of like, and like kind of educating themselves on it, they can finally have that conversation with their child to let their child know, okay, so here's the bad things about AI that I now understand. Here's the good things. Because, if they don't understand properly, they're just telling their children misinformation. And then the misinformation, it just spreads to one child to another. And now this whole house is just scared of AI, right? So I think like you should educate yourself first and then teach your children. I think parents have that responsibility to kind of educate themselves on modern topics. You should know about what's going on in their world so you can help guide them, and teachers too. Like, don't scare your students away from using AI. Like, your students should be allowed to use AI in healthy ways. How can they use AI to help them with research or supplement them in things like finding new information or like sorting out information that has already existed on Google, which I know AI can do. And so, giving students that space to explore AI safely will actually make them like, less likely to, rely on AI unhealthily, because they know how to use it properly when they're allowed to experiment with it.
And then I would also just say like keep like that open like understanding kind of like attitude when discussing these issues, because a lot of the time it's hard for like youth to discuss those things. So connecting experiences and relating with like kids like builds a lot of trust. And I feel like when there's that trust there, we're much more likely to go to them with like concerns, hopes, and like experiences with AI, I feel like.
A common theme that, like, with parents to their kids is, I believe that they should trust their kids more than, especially teens. They should trust their teens more than they give credit for. I know some of my friends are a lot more sheltered and their parents are less open-minded about things. So I think just a tip to all parents, be more open-minded. If you raise your kid to be independent and make their own decisions, then they can really be responsible. And how that links to AI, same thing. Like, once they're responsible, they can think for themselves, they can make their own decisions. Then oh, they want you to they want to show you this thing about AI. Then it's probably interesting, and maybe they can show you something out of it. Maybe they can teach you something about it.
Great. I think what really stood out to me kind of is just from the youth perspective, young people are really not looking for perfection, but just really adults who show up with that curiosity. I know that that was repeated several times throughout the youth responses, and that patient and that trust. So I'd love to kind of build off of that conversation a little bit. And Adele, I'll start with you with this first question. Kind of what specific behaviors can adults adopt to show curiosity, that the youth mentioned so many times about young people's digital lives without it feeling, intrusive or controlling?
Yes, I think the young people themselves said it probably a lot more clear than I could probably say is this theme around being open-ended and curious that can lead to trust. I think leading and asking open-ended questions that don't require justification and partnering that with this idea of shared uncertainty. Oftentimes, as adults, there might be some pressure on us to feel like we need a PhD in everything AI or everything emerging tech. And that's not the truth. Young people are looking for guidance. They are looking to know what is going on out there. And it doesn't mean that adults, their parents, their caregivers have to understand everything. I actually think it's better, and I think Michael was the one that said this, when you're leading with that understanding that I don't know and you may not know, so let's learn together. Let's have that shared moment. And I think when we're talking earlier about those points of connectivity that build trust, this is one of those times where having those open-ended questions, sharing uncertainty, avoiding this, usage before conversation where you just shutting down everything instead of having a thought process around what it could look like for your young person to experience this new emerging tech. I think normalizing the conversation is really what can be key. And those little micro moments we were talking about earlier can lead to having and adapting to curiosity.
I think that's great. And I really loved when you spoke about kind of learning together. So even if, the child and the adult or even the child and the educator are, unsure because tech, moves so fast, taking the opportunity to share that curiosity and start those conversations. So kind of building off of this, Christine, I would love to hear from, the standpoint of educators and classrooms, how can they support this confidence in learning, when they may not understand the technology themselves, as Adele spoke to and several of the youth panelists spoke about.
Yeah, to pull on the thread of leading of curiosity and sort of just releasing yourself from being the expert on all things AI and all things technology, I think it's really just profound to just sit with, how does this tool make you feel? You don't need to be an expert in the space. You don't need to have the technical knowledge to support the skills and the attitudes around it, right? So whether it's how does it make you feel, or how do you understand that this works? Like, how can we leverage this tool to get the results that you want? I think caregivers, parents, educators should feel very sound in leading with that versus all the technical things will come, right? Through exploration. It's all about how are you supporting youth in that moment. And we should just know, like, attitudes around AI and talking about that, it's an incredible, powerful moment because that often translates into other things, whether it's ethical use, or leveraging it to problem solve. So again, Adele kind of hit on it too. It's just really about feeling comfortable in the curiosity and supporting the skills and attitudes around it.
Christine, I think you brought up a really important point about just kind of your attitude, right? Can kind of dictate how a conversation goes, how that learning goes. And Adele, I would love to turn to you. And so, kind of, especially when something goes wrong, with kids and youth using technology, how can adult responses support this in cases like that?
Yes. I think there are some actions that adults and caregivers can take, but I also would like to preference everything by saying it's one of those, it's easier said than done. When a child has come to you, your child in particular, and they are coming to you in a moment of crisis because something online has gone wrong for them. It's not always easy, but the first thing we always do try to tell caregivers and adults and even educators is staying calm in the moment. As Christine just talked about, the way in which you react is really not only going to dictate the current environment and the current moment, but future opportunities for that child or that young person to come to you and talk about their online interactions, whether good or bad. So that emotional regulation really signifies safety for a young person. Also focusing on problem solving instead of blame. I very much encourage adults when those moments, if that moment does come up for you, to remember the moments that you might have gone to your educator, your mentor, your parent, your caregiver, and you knew you were going to go with something that made you feel blame inside and shame by how you acted, but you were going because you needed help, you needed support. So I think coming in for us as adults, remembering that we all were once there, leading with that kind of empathy is important, acknowledging the effort. And I also think treating mistakes as learning moments instead of proof of irresponsibility. For your child to come to you in a moment of crisis, or a young person, excuse me, to come to you in a moment of crisis, and treating that as a learning opportunity instead of oh, well, I have to take your phone away now, or I have to ban you from this site. Not saying that there should not be consequences, but really making sure that you're taking some of those moments to learn and to empathize rather than to treat it as just a complete, 180 mistake. And I think when we hear from our youth, and especially our Youth Innovation Council, they tell us confidence grows when adults respond in ways that don't escalate in fear and shame and blame, but are leading with empathy and problem solving than the opposite.
I think that's great, Adele. And I love your use of the word, leading with empathy and problem solving, because it creates a foundation of if teens feel comfortable coming to adults in the future or not. And Christina, I would love to hear from you as well, from your perspective, along the same lines, when something does go wrong, from the perspective of, discovery education in the classroom, how should kind of teachers respond? Is this kind of similar to parents? Is it different? I would love to hear more about that.
It's similar. The way that students are engaging with educators in a space is it's akin to a parent. It's a trusted adult in which they trust to sort of guide them. So I would say whether it's at home or in the classroom, pulling through what Adele had mentioned in an earlier topic, get those micro check-ins in, establish that sort of safe base of it's something minuscule, but here's my reaction, here's a safe space, and then be consistent. Continue to show up for your student or your child. They need to know that you're there because there's always going to be that little moment in the back where they're like, should have done that. I'm going to get in trouble. Should I even bring this up? And they just need to know that you will always just be there. So it's a very, very similar approach in the classroom as it is at home.
I think that's great. And, as we kind of bring section 3 to a close, I would love to kind of for you to expand on that a little bit more, Christine, and kind of what does that showing up look like, since families are so busy, classrooms are so busy. So kind of what are some concrete ways, for the people in the audience today that they can kind of take with them, that showing up looks like for youth today in our digital world?
Honesty. In addition to the consistency that I mentioned, just be honest. Like, you know what? Actually, I've never heard of that tool. Why don't you tell me about it? Or that's a really great question. Let's explore that together. I think to the point that we've been sort of mentioning throughout this entire conversation, they can see through us, right? They're perceptive. They are mature. So why put up a front or a face, go in it together, be their partner, be there for them, would be just a really concrete thing that I would mention to our parents today.
I think that's great. And I think that kind of goes to building that trust and that honesty as you speak to, that we've kind of been thorough lining through the webinar so far. And Adele, from your perspective, I'd also love to hear, in your work with, programming and working with youth, again, kind of a concrete small step for realistic, families and classrooms. What can they do and take with them after this webinar?
Yes, I think Christine hit the nail on the head. We as adults, we have this saying of we're going to fake it till we make it. And for young people, that does not fly. They can see right through that. And so I think leading with honesty, leading with curiosity, having those short, consistent check-ins matter more than the long lectures. Young people are going to be more receptive to having small key moments instead of this one big moment of lecturing about how to be safe online. And I think that, again, also will build up trust over time, allowing for both caregivers and educators to, have more conversations with their young people.
I think that's great. And I think that as we've kind of discussed today, I think it really comes down to, adults understanding that they need to create that open and safe space and that, not everything needs to be right. It's more in being present and being consistent and being willing to learn aside young people. I think that theme, we talked about it today. I think the young people kind of talked about that. And I think it also underscores kind of how important it is for that home and school environment to be connected in these values instead of separate worlds, which I think is the case for a lot of youth right now. And so I know that we have a lot of questions actually in the chat. And so I wanted to kind of transition us to begin to answer some of those. And I also, to preface before we jump into those questions, while we don't have the youth joining us live today, you're absolutely welcome to share any questions that you might have with them in the chat and with our experts. And for those youth specific questions, we'll be sure to take those back to the youth or the NoFiltr Youth Innovation Council and follow up afterward. So with that, I think it would be great if we head to our first question. And this question says, if a caregiver is worried they've already damaged trust, where can they start rebuilding? And Adele, Christine, feel free, either of you, to hop in on that one.
Not to continue to reiterate what we were saying, but I think in any situation, leading with honesty around where the trust maybe has been damaged. And then again, how are you leveraging your community to support you in that effort? So whether it's additional family members or professionals, how are you sort of building that ecosystem to aid you in those conversations? And then just being honest and forthcoming about, where you are and what needs to happen next.
That's great.
I would just echo that. I think leading with honesty when I hear from, our youth and they say, oh, well, this conversation didn't go right, but my parent acknowledged, what they could have done differently, that made a huge difference. And I would not put enough emphasis on the fact that young people just like that, like just how they are, know that adults are too going to make mistakes, but owning up to those mistakes, I think is important. And then something Christine said that I think was extremely important as well is that it does take a village. It takes a huge community. It's not just one organization, not just one company, not just one group of people that can make sure young people stay safe online. And similarly, I think for parents and caregivers, maybe you have damaged that relationship right now, so the trust isn't there, but that doesn't mean you can't rely on your young person's educator or your young person's mentor. There's other ways to make sure that your child stays safe online, but I very much want to emphasize that even if trust is damaged, still have those conversations, still try, still lead with empathy and honesty, because you don't want that person or that young person not to feel comfortable coming back to you if there is another issue that arises.
And I think that's such a great response. I think that just to kind of emphasize that, even though the trust has been broken, there's still an opportunity to build it back up, and that shouldn't be a reason to not have those conversations and to not open that curiosity. So thank you both for your answer to that question. Another question that we have here in the chat is, what should adults do when they're feeling so overwhelmed with how fast the AI is moving?
I would first foremost say you're not alone. Grab a friend. Even this webinar hopefully has shown you as an adult, Kaylin has been very generous in saying we're the experts. And I would bank and say for Christine and I, there's still so much technology that we don't necessarily know about. It's ever evolving. So first of all, give yourself grace. People who work in this space don't always know too everything that's going on. But what I think is common for everyone is that we lead with curiosity. I would definitely say that support system we talked about earlier, lean in on them. There are so many resources that are out there for parents, everything from scripts to guides to flashcards. So when you don't know, I would say also to just maybe do some research and see what's out there to help start that conversation. And then also to your young person, lead with that curiosity. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for that young person in your life and you to come together in those safe spaces and learn together.
Adele, yes, you are not alone. A lot of the work that Discovery Education does is alongside many like Fortune 500 companies, and they themselves are afraid of how rapidly it's evolving. So it is almost like a societal moment that we're having all together. So continue, again, to leverage an ecosystem, work at it together, and be honest, because I think everyone, even from a business perspective, is just unsure where this tool is gonna take us.
I think that's great, that perspective of we're kind of all in this together and we're all figuring it out, and just again creating those space for those conversations. And we'll do one or two more questions. The next question would be, what's something that you've learned from young people recently that changed how you approach technology conversations? Whether it's in this webinar, whether it's, last week, whether it's, sometime this year, something that's changed your perspective.
I will mention something that happened outside of this webinar. And it was just a reminder to me that time is ever moving and things evolved and they change. I was playing with a younger individual. She's about 6 or 7 years old. And we had to order food because that's what we were doing. We were ordering from a restaurant. That's what we were playing. And I said, okay, call the restaurant. And instead of her going like this to call the restaurant, she held her hand like this to hold a phone to her ear. And I thought, what is she doing? And it literally took me a couple of seconds to realize, oh my goodness, that's a phone. And that's her only exposure to a phone. So that if I did this, I would look wild to her. So it was a moment to realize like technology is evolving. I don't feel that far from a phone that looks like that, yet it is not even on this young woman's radar of what it could possibly be. But it's just a reminder that things evolve, right? And you've got to do your best to keep up with it. And it's also sort of like your role to educate. So now she does know what this could mean, right? So how are we just bringing the past into the future in a way that just provides the deeper context to youth, I think is also a learning that I had in that interaction.
I think that's great, Christine. And I love that example. I think that's hilarious. But I also just love how, sometimes you have to make those conscious decisions and to build the gap, right, of where technology understanding may lie. So Adele, I'd love to hear from you, your perspective on this question as well.
Yes. Christine, way to make us feel old. I'm over here like, wait, why would she hold the phone like that? I'm like, yep, that's the millennial in me. There it goes. Our young people would be so proud. I think one of the things that consistently come up for me, we have the opportunity, Kaylin, as you mentioned, to work directly with young people and to provide these safe spaces. So tech platforms, tech companies, social impact driven companies can come together and co-design and co-create digital safety resources. And I'm always so amazed by how quickly young people understand the problems that tech platforms or tech companies might be facing and not only understand it, but deliver it in a way that is so profound of saying, by you doing this, this is how it's impacting us. And then coming up with solutions, creative solutions on how to mitigate that. And I think we don't really give enough young people the credit that they deserve. We often say, oh, they're the future, they're in a couple of years, but young people are the group that is experiencing the most technology the quickest. And I think it's up to us, as Christine said, to really come together as a village, as a community, to make sure that they lead empowered and educated and that their voices are really embedded into the product design, into the policies that are for them, so that they can have a safe online environment.
I think that's a great point, Adele. I think that sometimes in these conversations, when we're talking about youth in the digital space, we sometimes forget to include youth in that conversation. And so just bringing that to the forefront that, youth need a voice too, as they're the ones that are having these new experiences that we were not able to have. And so I think that's a really good place to end. I want to thank everyone for their thoughtful questions, and a special thank you again to Adele and Christine for sharing your insights and experience with us today. I also want to extend a thank you to the NoFiltr Youth Innovation Council. I think their voices really grounded today's conversation. And as we wrap up, I hope that everyone leaves with a takeaway that, those conversations can start with trust and open communication. Even if there may not be, shared rules or shared alignment, they can start with a conversation. And so again, I also want to thank our partners at NoFiltr and Discovery Education. And thank you to everyone who joined us this Safer Internet Day for this conversation. I do want to know we'll be sharing a recording of today's webinar on social media in the next few days, but we really appreciate your time with us today. And I hope this conversation really has an impact on your home or your classroom or your community. And with that, we'll bring it to a close. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.